Oh,
All right. Welcome everybody. It's good to see folks. Let's have a little wave. I'm gonna Brady Bunch us so I can see. Yeah. Hi. Hope everybody's doing okay. Thank you for getting all of your bits in last week. It was great. Great to have all those proposals come in and you've gotten your feedback. So we'll save a little time maybe at the end to answer any questions or talk about that. And also please know, since we're not in a physical space together, consultation hours are a little bit strange. I'm happy to set those up, but anytime folks wanna have an exchange, let us know. Send us an email or Facebook Messenger message, and we're happy to pop on and have a chat, or we can have an exchange on email. I just wanted to say that. Right, so today's topic is we looked at Dracula as our case study, and we're going to talk a little bit about semiotics, or the study of signs and how signs operate in that theater project. So I have a few things to talk about. Donna, do you have some questions as well?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Maybe could we start, Stephen, could you give us just a brief on the piece and how you came to make it, and what you were, how you put it together with the amazing group of folks you were working with?
okay, yeah. So the last project we had done before this was Christopher Hampton's Dangerous Liaisons. And I had felt so choked and suffocated by text that we looked at trying to find a project where we could use no dialogue whatsoever, and that we could focus on refining the company's obsession with a particular kind of physical stylized performance. And so I love Dracula as a story. So, and because I wanted to explore homoeroticism from a female point of view, and sort of female desire and transgressions, we thought that would be a really fun text to play with. And so it was led by the ensemble of performers, myself and Dan really in the room. When we started, we kind of had a very different piece on our hands, and we improvised a lot for 2 weeks in a development. We were going to have live music at one point. Dan found an organ on the side of the road or somewhere and picked it up.
Alex found it. Alex found it.
Yeah, Alex Aldrich, their lead Dracula, found it. And so it was this really kind of fruitful creative process where we wanted to derive and reference and break apart film genre. So the idea is that the first act is a silent film homage. The second act was like a giallo horror, and like kind of beach party slasher girl films from the 60s. And then the final was like inspired by Tony Scott's film The Hunger with Catherine Deneuve and Susan Sarandon. So we were watching lots of particularly lesbian vampire or horror films, and didn't want to have kind of we wanted to play with and explore why so many of those films, particularly in the 70s, were misogynistic, and make them and sort of recontextualize them from a lesbian perspective, if that makes any sense. If that's what you saw, maybe not, but that was the intention.
It's probably worth mentioning Camilla as well.
So it's actually derived because Dracula, Bram Stoker stole, or didn't steal, but was inspired. He stole it. Stole the idea of Dracula from a novel by Matt Fanu called Camilla, which is actually about a female vampire who is alone throughout history, who seeks her mate in another woman. And it's a beautiful story, and actually is much more interesting than Bram Stoker's Dracula. And so we used Dracula as a film reference, and then actually and the story, but we were really interested in the essence of the Camilla narrative because it's much more tender and sensual. and about kind of female desire, as opposed to like, you know, this Romanian man coming into Britain and seducing all these women.
Mm. Mm.
I don't know if that gives you some context for what we were doing, but that was it. Yeah. It was all about history. Like that's why I think it's great for semiotics, because there's so much history embedded in every single gesture, every single image, every piece of music. And the great thing was that Dan was writing and composing a lot of that music with the actors in the room, or he'd prepare beautiful long tracks and we would improv in response to them. So it was a really tactile rehearsal process as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just it's a really elegant example of how semiotics works, not only in a theatrical context, but just in general. So so if at the base semiotics is just that interplay between the sign and the idea, or the signifier is the term that we use. So that's everything, right? That's language for sure, but you know, throw that out, even images, physical acts of nature, all of those elements, color, texture, sound, everything in that piece. And then the signified, or the idea that you're trying to reference. And of course, it's the interplay, the difference between those resonances that makes semiotics interesting, because we hold different ideas in our heads, but we also come together. I was really marveling at two things. One is that idea, which everybody who's done the reading is in the Stuart Hall piece about Saussure's idea that it's the difference between signifiers, which signify, and playing with that. And Hall goes through those how we know what differences look like, either by binary, so much color, you know, all those contrasts in Dracula, similarities, and where you're seeing doubling of things. Scale was also just magnificently on show in that piece, in terms of movement, in terms of the set, spatial relations, and kind of cause and effect. So it was kind of a master class in semiotics in terms of working with all of those different kinds of difference, if you will, to tell a story. But the other thing that I found really amazing is, for those of you who stuck through to the end of the Hall reading, there's a little discussion of Roland Barthes' idea about cultural myths.
Which is what the whole show is about.
Yeah. And I find sometimes when I'm talking or teaching about semiotics, you know, moving through those layers of signification is sometimes difficult to find examples. Advertising is usually really helpful. And if you haven't looked at the slide pack for this week, have a look at the ad that I chose that sort of illustrates the layers that are going on. But for me, watching Dracula, it was really interesting to think, like, at the basic level, the basic linking of the signifier, which is what he calls denotation. It's like there's all kinds of information. So the color red signifies something. The color white signifies something else. Certain sounds signify different kinds of characters. Like, all that's so rich. And then you can link those signs to broader themes. So blood can symbolize queer desire, or something to be feared, but also something to be courted and nurtured, or disciplined. All of those connotations that you might assign to some sign. And then it all pushes right back. It pushes out to all those bigger secondary, but bigger cultural myths, like the domination of heterosexuality, about the resurgence, the way that patriarchy kind of pops up and tries to kind of gain control of the narrative. I don't know if Stephen's nodding. I'm hoping I'm making sense.
It's nice to hear that, actually, as a maker, to have it read that way, because that's the intention.
Yeah. And that's the great thing about semiotics, is it's a framework or a mode of reading.
Yes.
Something you might say as text, but we can throw text out the window. We're reading it as a kind of symbol system. And I can't remember who said it. So asked last week, you know, I don't know if I got it right, but we're not doing that. It's like, what did you get out of it? This is just me rambling on a little bit about what I was reading when I watched Dracula.
And that's the beauty of semiotics too, is that it's what you associate with an image or with a sign that is actually what it means. It's not about like a collective knowledge. Would you agree, Stacey?
Yeah, absolutely. But you did call on all kinds of things in culture that signify, and then they're all the pinging off of film references, right?
Yeah.
Like The Sound of the Flies. I mean, I'm a child of the 70s, so I was like, the Amityville Horror. Like, I was just like,
yes,
going crazy about all those books that I read in the 70s. Sorry, old person
No.
here. Those V.C. Andrews books, those Children in the Attic books. And I mean, I was just going crazy with all those cultural references, right?
Mm.
Anyway, that's the beauty of semiotics. And theater is the best place to see semiotics at work. Yeah. All right, that's me fangirling.
Oh my God, I'm so, that's made my morning.
Good. Anybody want to say anything about that, or things that they were thinking about, or questions they might have?
I had something I wanted to like ask or talk about, and I guess it's just like, it's probably not a question, more of just a concern of mine, that I fear that like when watching that, I felt like there were signs there that were familiar, that I didn't kind of understand. And I was sitting there going, how can I understand this better? What don't I know here to have more of that response? Because I didn't have quite the response that Stacey had, but I had I enjoyed it. I loved it. It was so awesome to watch. But I know that there were elements that I was like, I think I'm not understanding it. I'm just like, what can I do? What can we do to not feel like that? I don't know.
It's interesting. That's perhaps like one or two things. It's like, is that the references are so that they're kind of suffocating your experience. That's one option, that like, you feel like you're disconnected from the material because the references are so overloaded. But the other could be that maybe as a viewer, for you, Gemma, it would be about enjoying the fact that, there's a familiarity, but you don't necessarily understand it, and actually kind of finding a frisson there that's kind of interesting. Like, going with the fact that it's unfamiliar might actually make your experience your own. You don't need to kind of dive deeper into the reference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. It was something I wanted to bring up because I think I had that a bit, maybe not so much with the other ones, but like this production in particular, I really enjoyed it. But I was also I was very keen to come to this Q&A to talk about where a lot of this came from in terms of what reference they were used, or especially when we're going to talk about semiotics.
Yeah, well, sorry, Stacey, do you mind if I, so there was a reviewer who talked about this very subject, who said, I haven't seen all of the Dracula films, I haven't seen all of these references, but he said that there were certain gestures like this and all that he had seen in The Simpsons. And he said that somehow there was some weird process of cultural conditioning where he was like, oh, I get it, that's Dracula, even though he'd never seen. Does that make sense? That's the kind of power of semiotics in a way too. It's like you can be fed the image or the reference through something completely other. Does that make any sense at all?
Yep. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I guess, that would be my response. What were you going to, sorry, cut you off, Stacey.
Oh, I was just agreeing actually with what you were saying. Gemma, I think that's a really important thing. One of the things that, if you're thinking in that way, in that semiotic way, it sort of introduces a kind of curiosity. I found myself too thinking, oh, what films might Stephen, that group, that collective, be referencing? Because I feel like my points of reference are different. I'm quite a bit older than those people on stage. And then I found a little bit of pleasure in there's that dance, there's that little dance move, Pulp Fiction sort of dance move that I recognized. And so it's one of those things that can just make your brain kind of have a curious like bubbling. Like I thought that Pulp Fiction thing in the middle of the night, like I woke up and I was like, yes, that's that twist of the ankle. That's where I remember that from. So I think it's really great to kind of, not let it overwhelm you, but let it stir up all that curiosity that your brain loves, to kind of look for things.
It's supposed to spark imagination too, like that you can read as much as you like into the images and take from it what you will. We're not guiding as hard. Does that make sense? Like we're kind of just letting you sit in the nightmare. It's dream logic too, I think, with semiotics sometimes. Because you can think about Jung and kind of those myths when you're looking at this kind of material as well.
Donna, what's going on in your mind? I can see.
Yeah, you're thinking, you're like, that is rubbish.
Sorry, I was replying to something. No, not at all. My questions are more around like process.
Great.
And how much, I was just, in terms of the physicality, how much was in the actor's control in terms of what, and how much was in your control in terms of that detail? Like, I was trying to work out, I wonder where they meet, like how far you're in?
They generated all of that material.
Okay.
As actors.
Yeah.
But they also were all people I'd worked with for 5 years, so they understood the physical vocab that we were playing in. So they would create the image, they would create some of the detail, and then like after a month, because we worked on that show for 6 to 7 weeks.
Okay.
Which you need for something like that.
Yeah.
And then after a month, we then went into a 2-3 week detailing process, which is where I come in.
Okay.
But it's all stemmed from their offer and their picture. Like none of it's me going, I want it to look like this.
Right.
Except what I'm doing is I'm going, that thing that you did in the improv that I adore, can you refine that to the point where the shape's really clear? And they will kind of go there. But it's all coming from the things they've been doing. Like the entire, oh, sorry, go on.
Go.
No, the entire last act actually is not even detailed. So as soon as that song Bela Lugosi's Dead plays, that whole section was directly lifted from the improv because we liked the organic, weird nature of it. Mm-hmm. So some of it is actually just them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The first chunk where it's like the Buster Keaton, like silent film, German expressionist section, that was also improvised. But then we went through a process of like actually looking at it like choreography.
So did you, because maybe you've talked about this process with directors, but the actors certainly won't be familiar about it. So in this process, did you come in with a breakdown of the story and go, okay, we have this piece of music, we have the silent film style, we're working on this scene.
Yeah.
Go. These are your characters, go.
Yeah, that's how it would work. And so, and they already knew that because a lot of them had participated in the development, but basically what we created together was we do a story breakdown. So we broke down the 500-page novel together into action, which you have to do. If you want to make something as detailed as that, you need to know.
Yeah.
And then we broke that down further into essential action and what I call story beats, which I'm going to give you the directors in a couple of weeks after I&E for Orion, because it's really relevant to adaptation. Yeah. And so then what we would do is from that document, I would then create a story treatment, like a film script of how things we might want to see, things that we had in the original development that were of interest. And then just like lines like Jonathan Harker shaving scene, go. And so in the improvs, the way that they were structured was we had each of these story elements, and they would get on the floor and take that story element and create the scene, which is pretty standard kind of practice. It's not anything particularly interesting, but the thing was, we had the parameters they had though were the genres, so silent film, giallo horror, and then kind of like new romantic eroticism. They had to learn the kind of physical language of that by viewing films and kind of finding their own references and imaginative spaces. But then they also had to combat the fact that they couldn't do any of it with text. So they had to work out how, in the improvisation, they could economically relay story, character, and emotion without expressing it vocally. So there were kind of like three things happening all at once.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they were really robust because what we would then give them is like music to help them imagine and help them create moods and atmospheres, so that there was at least one of those elements they didn't have to push as hard, so they could focus on character and gesture and genre rather than, and we've also got to do, we need to figure out ways to hold tension, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the music could help.
Yeah, I was even just thinking about the.
Sorry.
Like no, just for everybody in terms of their understanding as a director and their understanding as an actor of like a little bit like Moodle. It's like the work you're doing before. So you're gathering your references, like you're creating a big catalogue for yourself of, if it's from the actor's perspective, it's like, a kind of movement catalogue of things I like from the things that I've seen.
Yeah.
In the space, you're rather than planning exactly what you're going to do, you're trying to be totally spontaneous to that moment, but also like knowing that you have that, I keep using the metaphor of the iceberg, knowing that you've got all that support underneath you of that catalogue you've developed, and that's what you've got that's what you're doing during rehearsal. And then after rehearsal, you're refining your catalogue. Yeah. You're going, I'm going to keep that, but that didn't have, so you're refining that catalogue. Then you're going, starting to build the catalogue with new material, and you kind of keep doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I just jump in for a bit, one of the great things about working with Stephen is, before any developments or any rehearsals, anything like that, you get this gigantic folder of essays, references, films, images, all of this stuff, which is coming out well before we've even started the process.
And that's the responsibility. I believe that's the responsibility of a director, a good one. And I'm not saying I'm a good one, but at least it's something you should do, to be able to open up the imaginative space and create the iceberg that Dana's talking about. That should happen way before rehearsals, so that everyone is on the same page, and so that there is a shared world and a shared investment in the world you're about to create, and a very clear knowledge of where things are going before you've even stepped foot in the door. So that when you are there, it can be spontaneous because you've got all of that ammunition. That's such an essential part, I think.
Yeah. In the Rabble, we do the same thing. We do a lot of reading and a lot of engagement in the ideas, but most rehearsal processes, if we will probably also arrive on day one, and Kate and Emma will have stuck up imagery, like visual art imagery, that they have been inspired by for the piece. And the thing that I always find really useful about the visual art on the wall,
the medication that will just hide the results of things better.
Someone's on the phone.
Sorry, that was me. I pushed a button. I didn't mean to. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Donna.
Donna, you're muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Okay.
So yeah, we also use a lot of visual imagery that I find really physically inspirational. So even just taking a pose or something, in an improvisation, just I'll look to the wall and be like, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, and we do that as well. Like there's images all over the walls, and that, you know, also the performers like contribute to, like we have a Dropbox where performers put in their inspiration images as well, so that it's really quite collaborative. Yeah, you're creating a wealth of knowledge and inspiration to build from.
Yeah. Like
there's a scene in Dracula where I think during rehearsals, one of the performers watched Thirst, which is a Korean film by the director of Parasite, I believe. And so then the scene she talked about this image of someone drinking blood from a hospital blood pack. And so then the actor playing Dracula said, oh, why don't I experiment with that? And so we did an improv creating that image, and then that built into an entire sequence. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Stephanie's got a question in the
chat. Yeah. Why don't you ask just before this? A witch hunt. Yeah, I mean, if you know the original novel, the character of Van Helsing is sent in to destroy and kind of bring everyone back to patriarchal order. So yes, I guess yes is the short answer. So we wanted to lampoon and that's why he's the only male performer as well. So he's there to kind of counterbalance the feminine energy that is so terrifying to him, even though he's kind of like a jacked up homosexual. Yes, so the intention there was, yes, to reference witch hunts and also make him a priest to kind of bring in like religious shame, and which is all part of the novel too, because Bram Stoker was an Irish Catholic who was rumoured, so this is another reference, who was rumoured to have been homosexual and dating an actor who inspired the character of Dracula. So it's all very little things that are being referenced there, but it comes from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that answers your question, Steph. Wherever you may be in the sea of Zoom faces.
Thanks, Steph. Do type in your questions. Yes, okay. Do type in questions if you got them. Dan, I wondered if you talked just a little bit about that big kind of binder full of inspirational stuff and like what images and pieces you plucked out, and just a little bit about your process in terms of doing the sound design.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love the book Dracula as well. I read that when I was a teenager and thought it was great, and saw the film as well. And in the what's his name film, Bram Stoker's Dracula, the composer of that is a guy called Wojciech Kilar, who is fantastic. He's been Eastern European composer who's been sort of active since the 50s, I think. And there's all this super over the top dramatic stuff, which is I think why they pulled him out for Dracula. So yeah, that was kind of always in the back of my mind. Giorgio Moroder was another one who's fantastic. Who might have come to light a bit with the recent Daft Punk album.
Yeah.
But there was some great. I really loved because the song "Tears" that we used.
Oh yeah, at the start.
Yeah, at the start, which was a big thing, and that came back as a reference all throughout it, in various different ways, including there was a DJ Shadow remix of that, which was using the Marauder and a Metallica song from the 80s. So it was a great moment. I had somebody scream out laughing when the sort of started coming back in towards the end. And then the organ was fantastic. Like that was Alex, who played Dracula, who found it on Gumtree, and the bloke said it was broken, and that the pedals didn't work. It had a full 2-octave set of pedals. It was an amazing organ, but it just had a couple of crossed wires in it. So I just had to uncross the wires, and then it all kind of came back and worked really well. It was very difficult to get into the development, which was kind of fun. It was very difficult to get anywhere. It's enormously heavy.
And that's when we decided not to have a live.
Yeah.
Because we made that show on less than $7,000. That's including wages. Yeah. That show was made on nothing. So yeah, we couldn't do it.
But yeah, we had a lot of fun. The Buster Keaton style stuff from the start in the development for that, we're all just sort of playing along and watching them a lot, and pulling out ideas from that would stick. And there's one here.
There's quite a few questions actually.
I know. The shaving scene.
Yeah.
That was great fun. So that was that worked very strangely. I was writing that music not knowing what it was, and I was late to rehearsals because I was trying to finish it off. And then it was when we were in the Malthouse. I remember I turned up late, and I'd been up very late the night before working on it, and they were doing the shaving scene. Without music, I think.
Yeah.
And so I sort of came in and went, I wonder if this will work. And it just seemed to fit perfectly with that improv. So that really didn't change that much. So that was basically a happy accident.
But from the development, it did. Because some of the directors have seen the original development footage of that.
Oh, okay.
I've shown them where you were just... So basically in that example, Dan was like riffing on the organ as they were moving, and he was kind of developing sounds that way, so that he could bring in the palette. And I think some of that original kind of patter was used as a layer later.
Yeah.
But not in that particular scene.
No, that was... yeah, that's right. Because it was, I think, just sitting on the organ, the original one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think that actually... I think that the action came across, but musically I don't think it did.
No.
The things like Lucy's death, I remember that kind of the main melody for that we did in that original development. And it was just, Like when I sort of got something good from the improvisations, then I'd just write them down and develop them later on.
Mm.
So I think Lucy's Death changed a lot, but the original melody for it came out of the development.
Mm. Mm. And the way we played with some of the compositions too was that it was kind of like collage. Like Dan would have all these kind of pre-recorded slabs of music, and because it's just to answer Talia's question about the composition structure. And we would trial them in different sections. Like there was a piece of music that was intended for like the Jallo section, which actually worked better in the silent film section. So you kind of have, it's a process of like trial and error. It wasn't as like controlled. Would you say, Dan?
Definitely, yeah. And it was also, I mean, even though we did have a long rehearsal period, the race to the finish was pretty intense. Sorry?
No, yeah, it was.
It was. So the structure of it was not particularly structured. I mean, all the influences that I mentioned before, and Tom Waits was another one. That Rain Dogs came through quite a lot. But yeah, in a lot of ways it was thrown together.
But that's also like the nature of the work.
Mm-hmm.
It's pastiche, so that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Is throwing symbols together, throwing references together, and then applying them.
Mm.
Do we answer these other questions? How much longer do we have? Not long. With the performance group, were the group of performers trained dancers, physical theatre, or was this something that they had to work on and learn? So, is that interesting to people? So half of the group, so maybe less than half actually, Catherine Davies, Janine Watson, Kevin Kiernan-Malloy, and Alex Aldrich had a very strong physical theatre background. Kat was a burlesque dancer. She played the kind of Maggie Chung in the Mood for Love version of Dracula in the Chong Sam. And Kevin and Janine had worked with Zen Zen Zo Theatre, which was a highly physical theatre company up in Queensland. And because they're both from there. So those four really helped the other four develop their skills physically, because a lot of the other actors, so like the person playing Renfield, for example, Bridget Gallagher, who was in the Straight Jacket, is a much more naturalistic actor, and stylized movement does not come naturally to them. And so they were working with the team of actors and myself to kind of develop their choreographic and physical skills. And so it's all about sharing skill sets on that production, which is what made it feel like such an ensemble piece as well. Because, you know, even with like the fight choreography, there were things that I wanted to achieve that I couldn't even do. And so Kevin Kiernan-Malloy, who was Van Helsing, he would help us stage the fight sequences in a safe way because he had done fight training with Zen Zen Zo, and they all trusted each other because obviously we created a space that was incredibly safe. And I don't recommend you do that yourselves, like do fight choreography, but like we were able to, I think the performance group had their strengths were utilized and shared. And then the other question, elaborate more on some of the symbolic choices, color, the cigarette, sunglasses, etc. Maggie, do you want to elaborate on that, what you mean? Like, what would you like to know?
Just kind of like, were there specific, like in terms of process, I guess, I know you kind of touched on it before from kind of drawing on film and Dracula itself, and multiple sources. Did you kind of have like, did you sit down and kind of go, we want specific symbolic elements, like the color red should represent this,
No.
or did you, it just kind of all, and like the cigarette, I was just really like, I thought it was super cool how stylized that was.
The cigarette is like a crass sort of phallic symbol. Also, it's such a big part of so many horror genres. And so we use that trope, I think, because it kind of contributes to creating atmosphere and danger. It also is an absolute reference to a film called In the Mood for Love.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Cantonese love story. There's a really strange, disparate reference, but it sort of worked because it was about seduction and romance, and how the act of smoking can be so sexual.
Yeah.
It's like Stacey, it's quite crass and it's not a very sophisticated reference, but like it does give you a sense of like eroticism.
Yeah.
And just quickly on the symbolism,
yeah.
I was also kind of, I probably didn't describe my question very well, but in terms of like costuming choices and stuff, did you have like close relationships? Like how did you guys go about, did you have a vision of what you wanted for that kind of thing, or?
So I work with the design team, so including Dan, so yes, I did. Like we knew that that Dracula was going to be played by two people, and we knew that we wanted to symbolically show the difference between the aged female body in drag, and then the kind of like hyper feminine POC body in drag. So that was deeply considered. So the Cheongsam became this thing because it's such it's an object of desire within Asian cultures and images. And my designer grew up in Malaysia and Hong Kong, so he had a kind of aesthetic. Knew that that's what kind of was right for this particular character, and so those things were deeply considered. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
And,
that's really cool.
And the color we also didn't want it to be red. It's not red. It's blood orange, and that was specific.
Okay. Yeah.
We were like, and so that's interesting that everyone says red, because we were like, absolutely not, because it's a cliche red. So we tried to find a version that would give you the sense of red, but it was more juicy and more kind of about sex.
So, I think it's because we're seeing it on video too.
I was about to say, it was a bit harder to see.
No. But even in reviews, people said, the red dresses and the red, like, red.
Blood orange. Yeah.
But that's the level of specificity to answer your question.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Actually, I just the other day coincidentally found this.
That's an original costume design.
Yeah, which is for Dracula.
Oh, that's cool.
Probably looks a bit red there as well, but in life it's orange. But Eugene's drawings are incredible. He sort of draws each character, and lovely style.
He illustrates his designs with like in the style of the show as well. So each one will look different.
Amazing.
You put your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to know if you were doing the same project.
Yeah.
Now,
mm-hmm.
What would you do differently?
What would I do? I would try and steer further away from the narrative and not be held hostage by the need to kind of tell the story, like in a kind of linear fashion.
Yep.
And I think I would also.
That's even an interesting. Progression. I think that's an interesting progression. It's interesting in the context of people's I&E proposals, because a lot of feedback was about this, we resisting the need for narrative.
Yeah.
And creating in terms of meaning and looking for new structures. And it's interesting that, 5 years ago, that's where you were at in terms of, and now you might change that.
Yeah, and I mean, also the experiment was different. The experiment was to try and tell a story with sans text.
Yeah.
So I think that the experiment now would be much more about female desire and just exploring what that looks like in a kind of non-traditional sense.
Yeah.
That would be the evolution of it. But we weren't ready either.
Yeah.
Because we'd been making like plays.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the first show I ever devised. So
yeah,
that is true. It's all right for a first stab.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's interesting because we then went and did the Happy Prince not straight after that, but that was the next one. And the experience of doing Dracula had such a huge influence on how we approached that and things that, didn't matter. It's quite fascinating.
There's a hilarious question about why in the name of God would I have Wong Kar-wai reference in a Gothic style of performance? I don't know. I mean, I guess red color used in the movie as a kind of expression of emotions. Yeah, so I think that the reason why we've referenced that particular film is because it too relies on silence. There's barely any dialogue, as you know, because you like the film. And also it's scenographic and it relies on semiotics like color, as you say, about the Cheongsam colors and so forth. And so it was a craft reference rather than it was like a technical reference rather than this is related to the story.
It's also about everything about that film. Every still in that film is like still seduction of a painting, but it is totally seductive. So I think it is about sometimes, theatre doesn't. We can't always we shouldn't be trying to replicate what we can see in film because they're different. I've been thinking about this week. Like we have to think about theatre differently because they can't necessarily do the same thing, but they can have the same attention to detail. It's just through a different way, I guess. And you also can use, I think there's the thing of like, Stephen's not replicating film in terms of he's not necessarily he's not replicating the scenes that we're seeing on film, but he's taken certain essences. So when he's saying I'm doing a silent film, I would say he was looking at silent film for a physicality and a gesture, but not to replicate every detail. I think Wong Kar-wai's reference is about, for me, if I'm looking at the piece, it's like, okay, there's a sensuality that you got from that reference. How do I look at that tone of feeding that in? And so it's drawing references from everywhere, but also knowing you can't recreate a film on stage like that.
No.
Yeah.
Great questions, everybody. Thank you for posting all of those. I'm mindful of the time, so people can still maybe type questions in the comment box, but we do want to make a transition and spend some time with Dan talking about sound design and answering questions for your I&E, and he set a task. There's also a few more of those sound design questions you might be able to ask Dan. So are we okay to transition from this discussion? Thank you, Stephen, for sharing that work and talking about it. And thank you, Donna and Dan, for those great questions. And thank you.
Can I quickly ask, just Stephen, the physical theatre company that four or three of the, I think it was Janine and two others worked in Queensland. Yeah, what was that particularly called?
Zen Zo.
Zen Zo.
Yeah, they're nuts.
Yeah, great. Beautiful. Thank you.
Do they still exist?
Yeah.
They just folded, I think.
Yeah. They were a Butoh base.
Yeah, Butoh. Yeah. my favorite.
Yeah.
Mine too.
Great. Well, we might have to do some of that. We might have to do.
Buto would be good to do.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, Buto. Yeah.
All right, put your hand up if you're up for Buto. You can just raise your hand on the Zoom. Okay, let us. I'm going to stop